Samstapakaya Chitarmasya Dharma Swarupine Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishna Te Namaha. O Ramakrishna, establisher of the universal religion for the whole world, embodiment of that, to the noblest of divine incarnations, I offer my salutations. So just to update you, Swami Vimokshananda is recuperating in a place called Monahan, and I think he's doing well. So that's good, our thoughts and prayers with him. But of course, because he's absent, the normal Gospel of Ramakrishna is not being taken up because that's a series. But something about Ramakrishna is to be told. Also tomorrow is the Titi Puja of the birth anniversary of Swami Advaitananda. And Swami Advaitananda was a disciple of Ramakrishna, the oldest of these disciples. And so we'll say a little bit about him also. It struck me today, though, in spiritual life, one thing that is required to combat what seems to be a flaky world. The whole basis of the Vedanta is that this world is not what it seems to be. We can regard it in one of two ways. We can see it as a kind of apparition that we can't get to grips with, but normally speaking, it doesn't look like that. And so the other side of it is what Sri Ramakrishna described, one side of the coin, Nitya, the eternal, the other side, Leela, the play. How to engage fully in life? Why don't we consider this world to be a series of waves, some kind of play? Sri Krishna tells us that in the Bhagavatam, that this is a play on himself. It's not a cruel joke on you and me. We take life so seriously, and yet there are some really serious issues going on that affect us, and sorrow is real sorrow when we experience it. But it is useful to cultivate the attitude of imagination, creative imagination, that has the capacity to overcome the imaginary world in which we live. Ramakrishna had two stories about this. So one was, if you want to take your thorn out of a foot, you use another thorn to remove it. You don't have a military coup against Maya, as we call it. Maya meaning derived from the root to measure, but you actually use it because the capacity to reveal is also there. If you take Maya as a mother, Mother Maya, from a human point of view, this world is seen to be, or perceived to be, God's energy appearing as the world. And if you take it like this, we have Vidya Maya that gives us knowledge, absolute knowledge, gives us the real understanding, the real picture. And you have Avidya Maya, the thing which blocks that. And Maya has three compositions: the capacity to hide, the capacity to project, but also the capacity to reveal. A funny story that was given by Sri Ramakrishna was of two people traveling. We can imagine in a train compartment, one with a box with holes in it, and the other person opposite. And they strike up conversation, naturally, a long train journey. What's in the box? Oh, it's a mongoose. Why are you traveling with a mongoose? Well, it's to catch all these snakes. And the questioner immediately puts his feet up on the seat, looks around in a panicked way, and says, oh, where are these snakes? Oh, don't worry, they're imaginary snakes. Well, why do you carry a mongoose around? To catch imaginary snakes? And the man with the box opens the box. It's empty. He says, don't worry, it's an imaginary mongoose. Use your imaginary mongoose to catch the imaginary snakes. And so how do you look at the world in an aesthetic way? How do you see the internal beauty of everything? If the Lord of the universe is presenting himself, itself, herself as beauty, we need to have an aesthetic sense. We need to have the aesthetic sense of beauty within us. And we do, because human nature wants to develop culture, art. So all religion has painting, sculptures, images, dance, drama, singing. And so how was Ramakrishna as an artist? We can see from a very early age. He was a very accomplished painter. And there's an incident here that once when Ramakrishna was very young, he went to visit his married sister. And observing how cheerfully she was serving her husband and how contented the husband was, he painted a picture depicting the couple in that happy mood and presented it to them. People were amazed to see how lifelike it was. That's a telling statement, testament to Sri Ramakrishna as an artist, how lifelike the picture was. Today, when we look at some of the art that is highly prized, we can't really think of it in a proper sense. Some of it looks like splashed paint. I think there's a story that Pablo Picasso wiped his brushes on a piece of canvas and sold it for a fortune. He just signed P. Picasso, that was enough. So the realistic look, to see, to observe every single detail, requires the eye of an artist. I remember when I myself painted a picture of Swami Vivekananda. The idea really was, you see, 3 pictures were not there in our shrine originally. We only had 2 poster pictures that were given to us. Somebody went to the Hollywood Center and acquired these pictures, so I felt they had to be framed, and they were framed. The only thing is, we never had one of Swami Vivekananda, so I painted a portrait. Now, I'm not a skilled painter, that is, I have never been taught painting, but I realized you have to capture the spirit of the subject. You have to feel the spirit of the subject, even if you don't to begin with. Every line, every stroke, every contribution toward the eyes, the hands the most difficult to paint. Every texture of the skin captured. And I think it was a reasonable portrait, because when we got a poster, that portrait was given to a certain devotee, and he won't give it back. So presumably he wants to hold on to it. So when you paint a picture, whether it's a picture of Buddha, it's a meditation. In meditation, we can construct, we have to use the capacity of our imagination, and we have to replicate the things that we see, hear, touch, taste, in all glorious technicolor. As real as possible, we replicate so that we feel we are in a scene. And when we meditate on any figure, let us say, for example, Sri Ramakrishna, we can observe some things very carefully, but we have to have, firstly, the capacity to observe in great detail, and secondly, we have to feel. The feeling has to be there. In an artist's portrait or scene, you can see the difference between the artist that expressed the feeling and the artist that did not. The artist that did not is just like, a duplication. You may as well have just taken a photograph. Even a photograph requires an artistic sense. You have to see how to situate an object in a position that highlights it. A lot of consideration has to be done in professional photography. But when you have to take a brush and replicate to the point where it is so lifelike, is the expression, it means that you not only duplicated what was there, but you also, and this was not a portrait, but you also put the feeling into it. And what is the result? The result is that, observing how cheerfully she was serving her husband, so it says, and how contented the husband was, he shared this You see, he shared this feeling of cheerfulness and painted a picture depicting the couple in that happy mood. And that must have made them happy. Why would he do such a thing? Just out of generosity of spirit. Just to express. All art is an expression. When I gave people yoga exercise to do, I was careful to point out, you're not trying to achieve something. You're simply expressing the health that you already have. And so the whole of devotion is an expression. It is pouring your heart out. It is opening your heart and pouring it. And see how Ramakrishna had this great capacity. So Sri Ramakrishna had an artist's eye for perfection, for detail, and a keen sense of observation. And he knew the various kinds of physical features of different types of people. He would read that as soon as he met people. And one day, while visiting the studio of some professional image makers who made images of deities, gods and goddesses, for the purpose of worship, he pointed out, no, there's a defect in the eyes. The eyes should be long. And so he pointed out that they were not painting the eyes of these deities correctly. Divine eyes, he told them. Divine eyes should be lotus eyes, not ordinary eyes. They should be lotus-shaped. They should be long and pointed towards the ears. And he then demonstrated with some paint and a brush, and the image makers were greatly surprised at his insight into their art, because it's not duplicating any human characteristics. It's indicating by symbolism, by imagery, the divinity of this. And in later days, he sometimes, of course, drew pictures on the walls of the veranda of his room in Dakshinaswar using charcoal. Charcoal, of course, is one of the oldest mediums for art. In Africa, we see cave paintings some 20, 30,000 years older, depicting hunting scenes, depicting animals, all painted in charcoal from the fire, or in other colors, or ochre, for example, from rock. Then there was Sri Ramakrishna as a sculptor. So besides painting, another of his hobbies when he was a boy was molding images of different deities, gods and goddesses, out of clay. And later, when he was living in Dakshinaswar, he one day made a clay image of Shiva for worship. Matu Baba, the son-in-law of Rani Rasmani, who was the owner of the Dakshinaswar temple, saw that beautiful image. A few days later, he offered Sri Ramakrishna the responsibility of dressing the image of Kali at the temple as a result. One day, the priest, as we know, of the Radha Krishna temple fell while carrying the image of Krishna, breaking one of its legs. And Rani Rasmani was beside herself. She was very fond of that particular image. She consulted all the pundits and wise people of the day, and their conventional traditionalism, their orthodoxy says, you have to throw it away, get a new one. So she contacted all these scholars. They all opined that it should be replaced. When she came to Sri Ramakrishna, we see his wonderful wisdom. He said, well, if any one of your sons-in-law had broken one of his legs, would you just throw him into the Ganga? Or would you not send him to a doctor where his leg would be put in a cast, plaster cast, and gradually would be healed? So here's Sri Ramakrishna not only making images, but also appreciating these images once sanctified as so sacred that they are living images. Would you throw that away? Not just clay. So this living image was in fact repaired. And it was repaired so well that no one could tell that it had ever been broken. You couldn't see the hairline even. It can be seen in the temple today. Then there's Ramakrishna as a dancer. There are some people, when asked, please will you dance, they shy away and say, oh no, thanks. But one of the fetters that Ramakrishna mentions is this shame, this self-consciousness. When little children dance, their movements tend to be uninhibited and graceful. They dance automatically. Even small 2-year-olds will catch a beat and start moving the body or shaking. They instinctively know how to do this, and they're not worried who is looking. How this self-consciousness grows beyond the age of about 2 is remarkable, but we lose something the more we grow older and become more self-conscious. We become more egoistic, more concerned, what will people think of me? And so, one of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples said, coming to the master, we had to change our opinions about certain things. What certain things? That it is well understood that when middle-aged adults develop from children, when they dance, they're less graceful. Their movements are more self-conscious and awkward. But one of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples said, we have to change our opinion about this, because they said, though he was, for them, to them, in advanced age, in those days, about 50 years of age, was advanced. He was an old man from their point of view, not just middle-aged. The master danced, sang, made various gestures, and they said, how sweet they were. And when Sri Ramakrishna danced or sang, 100% of his mind was one-pointed without any distractions. So his body automatically moved gracefully without even thinking, what steps will I make? I don't think he ever took dancing lessons, but catching the mood of it, spontaneously he danced, just like Chaitanya had done before him. And his body automatically moved rhythmically because he could completely forget himself. He was able to become one with the theme. And that is the aim of concentration. There's every reason why yoga is called concentration. In Patanjali Yoga Sutras, this is how yoga is defined, that it is concentration, that is uniting the attention with the object. Subject and object merging, so they become one. So this concentrated, putting everything into it, made this graceful dancer, spontaneous. Then there's Ramakrishna as a singer. Music is the art of prophets, Martin Luther said. Sri Ramakrishna knew at least 181 songs, all of which he could sing from memory after having heard them only once. His voice was said to be very sweet and melodious, and people loved to hear him sing. Whenever Rani Rasmani came to the temple, she would ask Sri Ramakrishna to sing some songs about the Divine Mother to her. And then when he sang, just as when he danced, he became totally absorbed while singing. As he did when he was dancing, he did when he was singing, and such was his power that he could even transform lives through his singing. Once a grieving father came to see the master immediately after his son's funeral. Sri Ramakrishna consoled him and removed all the grief from his heart through the song. We make a small deviation here because it was the same with what became Swami Advaitananda, as he was called Gopalda, and he was married and he lost his wife. He was so overwhelmed with grief. And then it was suggested that he come to see Ramakrishna. First time he wasn't really at all impressed. You see these great people, these great men and women, they don't reveal themselves necessarily. Divine grace is required for it. But then gradually on the second time, he got his solace from the master. So Gopalda didn't profit much from his first visit. And he didn't find anything remarkable in the master, unlike others who immediately had an impact as soon as they saw the master. But by repeated visits, he got his solace. He began to frequent Dakshinaswar, and the overwhelming burden of his grief was completely removed. The master's simple explanation to him of the unreality of the world made a deep impression on his mind, and he began seriously to think of giving up the world in search of God, and he ultimately did that. We'll come back to Swami Advaitananda shortly. The song that removed the father's grief, in the case I mentioned earlier, translated goes like this. And when we think of Sri Ramakrishna as an artist with a sense of aesthetic, we're inclined to think of a kind of feminine quality. But look at what the song says. To arms, O man, death storms your house in battle array. We can think now of the Sri Krishna in the midst of the battle that we find in the Mahabharata, bearing the quiver of knowledge, mount the chariot of devotion, and the bow of your tongue with his bowstring of love, and aim at him the shaft of the mother, Kali's holy name. Here is a ruse for the fray. You need no chariot or charioteer. Fight your foe from the Ganges bank, and he is easily slain. Then there was Sri Ramakrishna as an actor. It is often seen how he used to mimic in a humorous way and have the young boys who were listening so intently to him roll on the floor. That's how it's described. Roll on the floor with belly laughter. We often think, you see, of holy people being extremely serious. Purnananda said, if you see a man with his chin down by his knees, this is not spirituality. More than likely, it's dyspepsia. So it is not the seriousness. It's all fun and joy because our nature is bliss. Won't it express itself in a joyful way? Absolutely. But of course, we know that Sri Ramakrishna was a young boy, and a theatrical group came to his village to give performance. Of course, his main actor playing the part of Shiva fell ill, and so they selected the young boy who became Ramakrishna. And he was asked to take his place in the role of Shiva and was dressed accordingly. As soon as he went on the stage, though, he surprised the audience by merging into samadhi, into a state of ecstasy, and standing there entranced in a posture. And like the true artist who becomes one with the object he contemplates, Sri Ramakrishna became one with Shiva. We are told that Hollywood actors playing character parts, for months and months ahead, they will rehearse, they'll study the character. How did he walk? What did he say? What was going through his mind? What was his accent? And it's all successful until they try and do an Irish accent. So studying every movement, they try to become as much one with the character as possible. But of course, there's always the understanding, I am not that. In giving classes on philosophy and trying to get people to understand 3 states of consciousness, we can think of it as, and 3 states of consciousness is a very critical argument in the Vedanta philosophy. It is the clinching argument to say that this world is something that comes and goes and changes, and we're used to only one stage of it, the waking state. But 2 others are also there. It's like an actor playing a part on a stage. And he always knows that he is the actor. I always use the example of the famous Shakespearean actor Irving playing the part of Hamlet. Naturally, he'll want to merge into the part as closely as possible, but there will always be that retention that says, I'm Irving, I'm Irving. No matter how much immersed you make yourself in the part, there will always be that self-consciousness. This is called the waking state. The only difference is we have so completely merged with the part that we've made a mistake. We think, I am Hamlet, not I am Irving. And of course, if you want to complete the other two stages of consciousness, you'll say, in a dream, we are sitting there as a witness in the audience, watching all the actors play on the stage. And only one entity is there, playing all the parts. And then finally, all the curtains drawn, all the lights gone out, all the scenery removed, nothing there. This is dreamless sleep, and the witness in the audience is seeing it. But in this case, Sri Ramakrishna is not only identifying with the part, Shiva, but some inner revelation is telling him, I am Shiva. And he becomes Shiva and goes into ecstasy, goes into a state of samadhi. So he's taking it to the nth degree, but still using an acting ability. He wasn't acting at that point. He was going beyond the acting part. Even during his boyhood days, Sri Ramakrishna organized his own theatrical party with his young friends in a mango grove of Kumarpuka. His memory was so wonderful that witnessing a drama only once, he could repeat the whole performance and teach it to his friends. And he himself often took several roles in the same play. Then what about Sri Ramakrishna as a comic, as a humorist, as a person of fun? So we are told a person could never be bored living with Sri Ramakrishna. When depressed, one should read the Gospel, of course, of Sri Ramakrishna, because there is a lot of humor. Almost on every page, there's a sense of humor coming through. And even in his methods of teaching, telling stories and parables, using dramatic scenes and using this sense of humor and fun. And the method of telling humorous story is very important. Not just dry things, not like us who just sit and deliver dry philosophy. You have to come down to the level of the listener. And even if there's a child there, you have to come down also to the child's level and tell the stories. But the factor of it is, we're all children. We're much more interested in the visual things presented. That's why the impact of spirituality and religion and so on is diminished so radically in Western countries, all over the world for that matter, but particularly in Western countries, because there is much more entertainment. There's only one problem: things are more entertaining. There's a real story without any names, of course. And somebody said, he said, I attended a concert at the O2 or something, and how long were you there? 4 hours. Oh, what a wonderful power of concentration, I said. No, I enjoyed it. Well, should meditation not be an enjoyable thing? When we see God everywhere, should we not employ our artistic sense? And should we not see that and make sure that we delight in every movement of this drama, this play, this cosmic play, this Leela? So one person may tell a story and evoke no response. You can see that with comics. Comics meaning, comedians. One person will tell a joke and nobody will get it. That's me, of course. Another person will tell it in such a way that before the person has finished, everyone is in uproar. So, while another telling the same story may overwhelm his listeners with laughter, Sri Ramakrishna knew the art of storytelling and used it very effectively. Familiarity with the culture and customs of Sri Ramakrishna's time is, of course, necessary to fully appreciate some of the events and some of the humor. But much of it, of course, is not regional, it's universal. And so, in terms of this, I would say again that he was a great mimic, which means a careful art of observation. And then there was Sri Ramakrishna as a teacher. What a wonderful teacher These great incarnations are the highest of all teachers. Artists express their feelings through symbols, but the same is true with Sri Ramakrishna in his art of teaching. It was based on illustrations and comparison and was very simple yet very effective. Using ordinary scenes from day-to-day life, he would explain the most intricate questions of philosophy. Any question that you have could in some place be found in the Gospel of Ramakrishna. In fact, you can categorize any question you have, look at the page, and find the answer out. Because one of the Upanishads will say, if you know Brahman, you know everything. One day, a devotee asked him in reference to this verse, see, don't forget, Ramakrishna never wasn't studying the Upanishads, but he heard a lot, and there was more than anything, he was a living Upanishad. So, he said, if a person knows God, does that mean he will know how many fish are in the ocean or how many stars in the sky? It's a catchy question. It's a tricky question. The master then told the devotee that he should strive to understand the teaching in a rational way. Then he gave this example. When rice is boiled in a pot, if you take one grain from it and press it between your fingers, you at once know whether all the grains in it are boiled. Because you have to have fingers of aluminium. Whether they're boiled or not. See? Why? Surely you have not pressed all the grains one by one. You only have to press one. What a beautiful, homely example that everybody can understand. Surely you have not pressed all these grains. Just as this is understood, so by examining one or two things of the world, it is understood whether the whole universe is eternal, transitory, real or unreal. This is a great lesson for modern science. See, modern science has fallen into the trap of trying to examine every single subparticle, every single entity, instead of applying a universal truth and saying, once I understand one thing, I'll have the whole thing. And this was the whole purport of the discovery of the rishis. They stood in a place and said, I'm here. They didn't look around and say, so where is God? They stood in one place and said, I'm here, what is that? Knowing that, if I want to know the whole of everything around me, the whole of the universe, if I want to know all the stars, if I want to know the end of the whole universe, and if we want to know the substratum behind every atom, all I have to do is make an analysis of the sample most close and most familiar to me, that is me, myself, this body, this mind. Who am I? That was the question of the rishis. I don't have to look at every single item in the universe. I can just take one sample and I'll get the whole thing. A man is born, lives for some time and then dies. A cow also does so. A tree too behaves in the same way. By examining things in this way, you come to the conclusion that whatever has name and form follows this law, says Ramakrishna. The earth, the sun, the moon, etc., they have names and forms. They therefore are of the same nature. You thus come to know that the whole of the universe is similar. You then know the nature of all the things of the world. What has he done? He's used multiple examples now. If you didn't catch it the first time, what about the second, the third, the fourth? In some way, you'll catch it. When asked to explain Sankhya philosophy, some people come to these classes, scratch their heads and say, Sankhya, what is the Sankhya? When we started here, one man even said, a Hindu man said to me, what is Vedanta? Never heard of this. See, the fundamental philosophy of Hinduism, never heard of this. So Sri Ramakrishna described this Sankhya. He describes it in the form of a marriage ceremony in a Hindu home. The master of the house sits in the living room smoking his hubble bubble. He doesn't work, but the housewife bustles around doing this and that, and from time to time she comes and gets her husband's approval. I am doing this, is it all right? The husband simply nods his head and smokes his hubble bubble. This is an example of Purusha and Prakriti. Of course, some may say this is an example of laziness, but that's not the point. But therein, you see, Ramakrishna's humor. So this is Purusha and Prakriti, and also denoted in symbols of male and female. We see it in the game of chess. In the game of chess, derived from this military field, coming to us through Persia and from before Persia, from India, India and Persia being the same thing actually, at one point. Iran is the corruption of the Sanskrit Aryan. So this game is there, this game of chess, and everybody knows that the queen can move anywhere she likes. She has whole dominance of the entire board. No rules and regulations for her. But the king just stands there, see. So this is also the example of this Purusha and Prakriti. According to the Sankhya philosophy, Purusha, the conscious principle, is actionless. Prakriti, or Maya, with the three gunas, does everything with the consort of Purusha. Likewise, our consciousness within, Purusha is actionless, but our body and senses, Prakriti, are functioning with the consent of Purusha. A beautiful, simple portrayal of how it works. We have to learn from that. We who are delivering this, going on the whiteboard and doing all kinds of diagrams, as is my wont. And a simple story will tell it. Now, whether you grasp it or not, this is a simple story that you can revisit constantly. When somebody asks, what is Sankhya? There it is. Though besides being an artist himself, Sri Ramakrishna's influence in the arts was even greater in the encouragement he gave to many artists, many writers, actors, singers, dancers, musicians, etc. So he was a patron of the arts. And they all came to visit him. Why would he be a patron of the arts? His fundamental message is to get this artistic sense, to employ the creative imagination, is entirely spiritual. And when Girish Chandra Ghosh, the famous dramatist and actor, wanted to give up his writing and acting career and become a monk, Sri Ramakrishna discouraged him, told him that many people would be benefited by watching his dramas. And Girish once said, I learned how to write drama and how to act from Sri Ramakrishna. Mahendranath Gupta, as we know, was a school teacher and author, of course, of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, said, I learned how to teach in school from Sri Ramakrishna. And Swami Vivekananda said, I learned how to reason scientifically from Sri Ramakrishna. Imagine that whole scope, that whole range. A recent book that was written, well, relatively recently, by Bengali professor Nalini Ranjan Chatterjee is about Ramakrishna and the Bengali stage. This book describes the tremendous influence Sri Ramakrishna had on Bengali actors. Not only actors, but also actresses and also musicians. And he is literally worshipped, of course, as the patron deity of the stage. Even today, many Bengali actors and actresses salute the picture of Sri Ramakrishna before they go on stage. Picture is kept there, a tradition that was started by Girish Ghosh. And at that time, in Ramakrishna's day, of course, women who acted in dramas were considered to be highly immoral, very low grade. They were considered to be the dregs in society. But good people would not attend to their performances because of their involvement. But it was Sri Ramakrishna who gave these women his blessings. And we are reminded of his predecessor, the Jesus, who was accused. He lives and dines with sinners and prostitutes. He didn't have an eye like that. He saw the divine in everybody. And so he gave these women his blessings and approval, thereby gaining for them society's approval as well. He acknowledged the gift of the artist and elevated the women to the highest status. And he actually brought about a revival of the Bengali stage. So this is some thoughts on Ramakrishna as an artist and somebody who had an artistic eye, somebody who taught us to employ our sense of aesthetics in viewing the world. And in viewing it in this way, if we shift our position in this way, we can have a lot of fun. You see, it was the atheist Ingersoll who said to Swami Vivekananda, the trouble with you religious and spiritual people, you have no fun. You don't enjoy life. And Vivekananda's retort was, on the contrary, I know how to squeeze every drop of the orange of life, because an added value is given to everything when we see that divine in everything and everywhere. Let us come now to Swami Advaitananda. And in doing so, let us see if we can also pick up some clues about Sri Ramakrishna, how he taught and his influence. We have to remember that all the behavioral characteristics of all the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna and in their teachings was really just an echo of the Sri Ramakrishna. The Gospel of Ramakrishna is really only a record of weekends and public holidays. What went on in between, we don't have much idea until and unless we pick it up from these disciples. And we don't really have any teachings from Swami Advaitananda. And the reason for that is because he was older than most of the others. He was the elder. He died at the age of 81, which was pretty old in those days when he died. And so he was considered in a special way, a little bit, as an older person. He was one of those, when Ramakrishna passed away, he was one of those who, along with one other, started the Baranago Mutt because they had no other home. And then he was very steadfast and in everything he did, a kind of perfectionist in a way. But the perfection wasn't a compulsed one. It was more in the long line of, every action that I do has to be done perfectly. We remember in the Bhagavad Gita how we have a definition for yoga. Two definitions are there: equanimity of mind and skill in action. And so it is the skill that we have to employ. And we see the concentration that Sri Ramakrishna employed. In every activity, we apply that same level of energy. Take the attention and steer it in a dedicated way and be observant about our surroundings so that they're all in place, all neat, all tidy. A lot of people spend a lot of time looking for things. You know, there are the kind of person who has two kinds of people, I suppose, broadly speaking, if we make generalizations. And one says, yes, this pile on this desk, I know, don't worry, don't shift anything, I know exactly where everything is. It doesn't mean that. It means I know where the pile is. And I go through the pile, and then you're using a lot of time. That's not very efficient. So when you look at somebody's desk, you know the state of their mind. Oh, it's very efficient, everything in an orderly place, and so on. Anyway, we have said how Gopalda, his wife had died, and he was overwhelmed with grief. But the simpler explanation from the Master about the unreality of life and stimulated his mind to search for God. We can see this same thing, that all bereavements, all disappointments are kinds of bereavement. They are nature's way of helping us to inspire the mind upward. And so it was in this case. So ultimately he renounced the world and devoted himself, heart and soul, to what? To the service of the Master, particularly in his last illness. He was very neat, he was very clean, he was the embodiment of method and orderliness, and these traits received great appreciation from the Master himself. Again, his service to the Holy Mother was equally wholehearted, because Mother was bashful. And so she really could only allow certain people near her, males near her. Latu was one, Gopalda was another one, maybe a few others. And so Gopalda used to attend to all her needs. One day, Gopalda expressed a desire to the Master to distribute some Gerua cloths, ochre cloths, belonging to sadhus, representing the fire of renunciation, and rosaries to monks, any monk. It didn't occur to him that the monks were there, right there, including himself. And the Master replied, "You won't find any better monks than these young boys here. And you may give the cloths and rosaries to." And so from that on, we can see of the Krishna order. And placed a bundle of saffron cloths before him, and the Master himself distributed these Gerua cloths and rosaries among his disciples. And so the seed of the future movement. At the Kashipo Garden House, Swami Vivekananda, then Narendranath, was sitting one day in meditation and lost outer consciousness. His mind flew beyond the realm of relative consciousness and was merged in the absolute. And it was Gopalda who saw this and became terrified. He rushed to the Master and reported, "Narendra is dead." This is Nirukalpa Samadhi. Master understood that and assured Gopalda about this. And after some time, regained all consciousness. So it was Gopalda who was witness to that. Even today, there was a question. Yesterday there was a question amongst a group of devotees. You see, this Nirvikalpa Samadhi, does it mean that a person flies off, then it can't retain the body? Well, according to our understanding, 3 weeks, 21 days, of course, Sri Ramakrishna stayed there for 6 months. But then we can see this way, when somebody goes in, they can be brought out again. And we saw this, they saw this on many occasions with the Master himself. Because after some time, of course, Narendra regained consciousness, normal consciousness. As I said earlier, after the Masters passed away, it was Tarak Maharaj, that is Swami Shivananda, and Gopalda, who really were the first inmates in this Purnananda monastery. And after staying there for a few years, Gopalda goes to Varanasi, where he practices austerity. They all go off in different places, but he's gone to Varanasi. And he stays there for about 5 years. They say that anybody who saw him there or had the privilege of being with him there, they saw his regularity in spiritual practices. It was a wonderful thing to say. So as an example, very early in the morning, even in the severe wintry days of Varanasi, he would get up and go to the Ganga for a bath. And from there he would return shivering with cold, but his mind was absorbed in reciting Sanskrit hymns. And the program then of the whole day was fixed. He would follow it without the least deviation for days, months, and years. And it's a lesson for us in spiritual, not just spiritual practice, but anything that we want to do or achieve. It's no good committing a half a day or a half an hour just sporadically. When we pass the exam, well, I don't know, but I'm studying. How are you studying? As I feel like it. Sometimes on the weekend, sometimes not, sometimes on Monday, otherwise a Tuesday. It depends. Well, that's not a good formula for passing your exam. It's the same thing in spiritual life. In spiritual life, there has to be steady practice. And so in order to do this, we have to have some routine. This is why we have monastic routines. This is why we get up at a certain time, we eat at a certain time, why we have vespers at a certain time, and so on. All of these things are marked out in all monastic life. The Christian liturgy is divided into 7 steps, 7 times. And way back when Saint Benedict introduced the Benedictine rule, the monks would go to bed pretty early, and they'd get up after midnight. And then for several hours, they would be doing this matins, followed by lauds. And so it goes on. This routine was kept up. So we see now that's easy in a community. What about an individual? And most people are trying to practice their lives in an individual way. One comment I might make, that you see, it is greatly advantageous if 2 people in a family, that is husband and wife say, and children if possible, all act as a supportive community. Then it's much easier than handling things as an individual. Anyway, the program of the whole day was fixed. And at that holy city, he lived just on small quantities of cooked food collected from various houses. That's the traditional way, so that it might not be taxing to a single individual. And that is why it was the traditional way for sadhus. And adjacent to a place where an image of Shiva was installed, he occupied a small room. And even this room was neat and clean, everything kept in its proper place. The room at once gave an indication of great taste and orderliness. His steadiness would cause wonder to those who watched him. He was quite indifferent to worldly sights and sounds. He followed his own tenor of life in the contemplation of the divinity from day to day without a break. Now when Swami Vivekananda returns to India and organizes the Ramakrishna Brotherhood, Swami Advaitananda was given, he returned, he partook in the Alambasa Mutt, and afterwards stayed mainly at the new monastery at Belur Mutt, and his job really was the supervision of works, the management of various affairs of the monastery, garden work in particular, and all the work undertook or supervised had to be done very systematically with scrupulous care. But you see, in these hard times, what is your antidote? A sense of humor. So there is an incident, of course, and of course he would be quite stern. He would rebuke the younger members, and he would take his criticisms more as a token of affection, they would, rather than indication of bitterness from their part. But he would say later, the Master has shown me that it is he who is manifested through all, then whom to blame or whom to criticize. And after that experience, that inner revelation, he ceased from finding fault with anyone, however great might be their errors. Even in his old age, he was independent, self-supporting. He wouldn't like anybody to take any trouble or attending to his personal needs. And of course, being the oldest in age, he was looked upon with affectionate regard by all his brother disciples. And of course, they enjoyed making fun with him because that's how you bind a community. In fact, Swamiji composed a comical verse to tease him, but it really indicated affection. And the old Gopal too, he had his moments of humor, though it might have been at the cost of others. On one occasion, the monks had instructed the younger ones, the novices, go and dig this place here, and it was very hard. Gopalda came along to them and shook his head and said, "Oh, how cruel. They've made you dig in the hardest spot. Come, dig here and plant a garden." And of course, he knew very well the new place was even harder. What a hard labor they are put to this. Come away, all of you boys. You shouldn't be made to work so hard. So like this. And so Gopalda was not always successful with everybody. And so he would have had great arguments with me because he thought tea was not very good for you. But Swami Subodhananda, on the other hand, said every drop of tea is a drop of fresh blood. But Gopalda thought that tea would bring on dysentery and so on. So they disagreed on this point. Again, this brotherly spirit was there in a contest between the tea drinkers and the non-tea drinkers. But Gopalda's special duty was leveling the newly purchased land at Belumat, and we can see how wonderfully that was done. And the land had previously been used for repairs of steamers, and so it was full of pits and canals. It wasn't even. We can see now how beautifully laid out Belumat is and how even the ground is. And so it was strenuous work. And then when it was fully established, Gopalda willingly took up the duty of looking after the comforts of the monks, producing vegetables and produce and offering it to the master. But we see here the karma yoga at work. He made strenuous efforts to mold his life according to the life and example of the master. And that is the most important thing. When you have such an elevated guru as Sri Ramakrishna, what will you do? You'll try to emulate that person's life. And all being individual characters with individual characteristics, we'll pick up one thing more than another, but overall, we should try and do that. This is why Swami Vivekananda only carried 2 books in his wanderings. One was the Bhagavad Gita, and the other one was the Imitation of Christ. Imitating is a key thing. Gopalda did not engage himself in any public activity because of his age, philanthropic, missionary, or otherwise. So he was very contemplative, and really it was his job to look after the needs of the monks and so on. And so long as he was in the physical body, he definitely set a great example to all. He was a source of inspiration to many. His uniform steadfastness in his sadhana to the very last days of his life elicited admiration, if not even reverence, even from his brother disciples. His love for truth was wonderful. He heard the master say that one should not twist truth even to make fun, and Gopalda obeyed this instruction in letter and in spirit, and insisted that others do the same. Of course, during his lifetime, he traveled extensively to many different places, and after suffering for some time, though, in old age, comparatively for that day, suffering from stomach trouble, he passed away on 28th December, 1909. He was 81 years of age. So there's a little bit now about that. So it's 6:30. We finish off. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.